All right, so we've got a pretty hefty stack of reading here, all about how to conquer challenges.
Yeah. Looks like someone's ready to dive into resilience and resourcefulness, huh? Turning those setbacks into advantages.
You got it. And we'll be exploring this idea through excerpts from The Obstacle is the Way and The Book of Five Rings.
Ooh, nice. So we'll be jumping between historical figures, a bit of Stoic philosophy, some modern-day examples.
That's the plan. Get ready to see how some people can find opportunity in the face of what others might call, well, disaster.
It's really interesting, actually, because these sources, they don't present these ideas as some sort of mystical secret sauce or anything.
Yeah.
They argue that this ability to turn obstacles upside down, it's a skill, something you can develop, a way of thinking you can actually cultivate.
That's encouraging. I think a lot of times it feels like some people are just, hardwired to handle pressure
Right.
while the rest of us just kind of crumble. But these sources seem to be saying that's not necessarily the case.
Exactly. And they start by focusing on perception. It's not about what happens to you,
What?
but how you view it. For example, they use John D. Rockefeller, who, you know, absolutely thrived during financial panic.
Oh, yeah, Rockefeller, fascinating guy.
While others were losing their minds, he was spotting opportunities.
And making shrewd investments, right? I mean, it's amazing how someone can remain so level-headed when everyone else is in a complete frenzy. Was that just him being him?
Well, the sources suggest it wasn't just some innate trait. They dig into how he actually trained himself to be objective, disciplined, even when surrounded by chaos.
So he wasn't just ignoring reality, he was learning to see past the noise.
Yeah, to see the underlying, dynamics, the real situation.
So you're saying it's like training your mind to look past that initial panic and focus on what, a more strategic response, almost like a mental martial art, I guess?
That's a great analogy, and something we can all benefit from, I think, especially in today's world. We're constantly bombarded with information.
Yeah, constantly. And we often react out of fear or anxiety.
These sources argue that by learning to control that perception, we can actually start to see those opportunities that everyone else is missing.
Okay, I'm starting to see how powerful this shift in thinking can be. But how do we put this idea of perception into action? We can't just tell ourselves not to panic, right?
Right, it's about more than just positive self-talk. The sources offer this fascinating example from World War II,
Okay, let's hear it.
the German Blitzkrieg.
Ah, the Blitzkrieg, designed to overwhelm the enemy completely.
Right. Trigger that primal fear response that would lead to surrender.
Intense stuff.
But General Eisenhower did something remarkable. He basically said, look, this situation, this isn't a disaster, it's an opportunity. He flipped the script.
So instead of being totally paralyzed by fear, he saw a weakness, a way through.
Exactly. And this is where perception meets action. The very speed and aggression of the Blitzkrieg, which were supposed to be its strengths, became its weaknesses.
Because the Allies adjusted their tactics, right? Wow, powerful example. But let's get real for a second. Not all of us are facing tanks and armies every day.
True.
What about those internal obstacles, the struggles we face within ourselves?
The sources address that too.
They do.
Yeah, and they use a very compelling figure to illustrate it. Reuben Hurricane Carter.
Oh, wow. Wrongly convicted, spent years in prison.
Yet he absolutely refused to let it break him. He said, and I quote, "I will not, under any circumstances, be treated like a prisoner, because I am not and never will be powerless."
That is a powerful testament to the human spirit. But how does that relate to, turning obstacles upside down?
It highlights a crucial point. Even when the circumstances, the external things are dire, we still have control over our internal world, our thoughts, our beliefs.
Our reactions.
Exactly. And the sources connect this back to Viktor Frankl.
Another incredible story of resilience.
Having survived the Holocaust, Frankl wrote, "Man does not simply exist, but always decides what his existence will be, what he will become the next moment."
Wow. So even in the darkest of times, we have a choice.
We have a choice in how we respond, even when we feel completely trapped, powerless.
Okay, but how do we actually make that choice, especially when every emotion is screaming at us to panic or just give up?
The sources suggest we need to develop a specific mental skill. They illustrate this with the story of Miyamoto Musashi, the legendary samurai.
Musashi, okay, I'm intrigued.
They discuss his concept of what he called the observing eye versus the perceiving eye.
Observing versus perceiving, okay.
The observing eye sees things objectively, without distortion.
Hmm.
But the perceiving eye, that's one that gets clouded by our emotions or assumptions.
Okay, I get it. So how do we train ourselves to see through that observing eye, especially when we're stressed or facing something difficult?
Well, Musashi and the sources suggest we can actually practice this objectivity through certain exercises.
Exercises, like what?
Well, for example, one is describing luxurious or intimidating things in the most basic, stripped-down terms.
Strip down, huh?
Imagine describing a fancy sports car as just a metal box with wheels.
Okay, I see what you mean. That's funny. But how does that apply to real life obstacles, the serious stuff?
Well, think about it. How often does a problem seem bigger, scarier, because we're layering on our own anxieties, interpretations?
It's adding our own drama.
Exactly. But by practicing this objectivity, we can start to see the situation for what it truly is, without all that emotional baggage.
So learning to detach from the drama and see the obstacle clearly, a challenge to be met, not a monster to be feared. I'm starting to get it.
That's it.
That's a great way to put it. So it seems like the first step in turning obstacles upside down is like learning to see them through that clear lens, that objective lens.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah,
But then what?
right. We can't just sit around observing, can we?
Nope, action is key.
At some point, we've got to, actually do something.
The sources emphasize that it's not enough to just think differently. You have to pull those insights into practice. They draw this interesting parallel, actually, to the early days of the space race.
Oh, the space race.
Yeah, where NASA was so focused on training those astronauts to stay calm,
Yeah.
under unimaginable pressure.
Yeah. Those early astronauts, talk about a pressure cooker. Facing the ultimate unknown, how did NASA prepare them for that?
The sources explain that NASA understood how easily, panic could lead to disaster mistakes.
Absolutely, yeah.
So they drilled those astronauts relentlessly, recreating the launch sequence again and again, exposed them to, like, every possible trigger.
Oh, wow. Like what?
The rumble of the engines, the feeling of G-force, everything.
So instead of trying to suppress their fear, they basically trained their nervous systems like to be calm under duress.
Precisely. By the time they were actually strapped into that rocket, they'd lived through the launch so many times in their minds that it had become almost routine.
Wow, that's incredible. It's like turning anxiety into what? Muscle memory.
Yeah, something like that.
But how does that apply to, the rest of us who aren't rocketing into space?
Well, you can use that same principle of mental rehearsal to prepare for any challenging situation.
Oh, I see.
A big presentation at work, a difficult conversation.
Yeah. Okay.
Visualize the scenario, anticipate those potential triggers, practice your response.
So it's not about pretending the pressure isn't there. It's about developing the mental fortitude, I guess, to perform under pressure.
You got it. And the sources offer a few practical techniques for building this emotional resilience. One of them is using logic to counter those, knee-jerk emotional reactions.
So instead of letting fear, anger take over, you sort of take a step back.
Ask yourself, is this really as bad as it seems? What's the most rational way to approach this?
Engage your prefrontal cortex, right?
Yeah.
That part of your brain that's all about rational thinking to challenge those, what did you call them, amygdala-driven fear responses?
Yeah.
It's like being the CEO of your own emotions, making conscious choices instead of being ruled by those instinctive reactions.
You got it. And the sources also highlight another powerful tool, affirmations.
Affirmations. Okay.
By consciously choosing positive, empowering thoughts, you can create that mental environment that supports you, helps you overcome those obstacles.
So it's not about denying the difficulty of the situation. It's about choosing thoughts that fuel your resilience.
Rather than feeding your fear. That's it, exactly.
And this ties back to that stoic concept we talked about earlier, right?
Right.
Focusing on what's within your control.
Exactly. You can't always control what happens to you, but you can control how you respond.
The sources also talk about the importance of staying present, not dwelling on the past or worrying about the future.
It's true. Dwelling on those things just amplifies anxiety.
It does.
They
Yeah.
suggest practices like, mindfulness meditation.
Okay, yeah.
Or even just taking a few moments each day to just appreciate the simple things, what's around us.
I guess it's about remembering that the only moment you truly have power is the present moment.
You got it. The past is gone. The future is uncertain.
Yeah.
But this present moment, this is all we have. And by learning to be fully present, we can tap into our inner resources. and respond to challenges much more effectively.
This is all making so much sense, but I'm also realizing how much of this is a mental game. We've been talking about perception, about controlling our emotions, but there's almost like a deeper level to this, right? Something about fundamentally changing how we think about obstacles themselves. Am I on the right track here?
You are. The sources really delve into this idea that sometimes the biggest obstacles we face are the ones, well, we create in our own minds.
Yeah.
And they use Steve Jobs as a prime example.
Ah, Steve Jobs, his famous reality distortion field.
Exactly. Jobs was legendary for his ability to, like, bend reality to his will, seeing possibilities where everyone else just saw roadblocks.
The sources mention that one example of this was when Jobs insisted on using a specific type of glass for the first iPhone. And the manufacturers told him it was impossible, that they couldn't produce it in time.
And what did Jobs say?
Don't be afraid. You can do it. Get your mind around it. You can do it.
And you know what? They did it.
Wow, it's like he refused to acknowledge limitations.
Like, he truly believed things could be done,
Yeah.
even when everyone else said they couldn't.
But how do we develop that kind of thinking? Especially when we're facing something that feels truly impossible.
The sources offer some really practical advice for this. One of the key strategies is questioning assumptions.
So instead of just accepting the limitations we've been told, or that we believe to be true,
Yeah,
we need to ask ourselves, is this really the only way? Are there other possibilities I'm not seeing?
you got it. We often operate on autopilot, accepting limitations without even realizing it. But what if those limitations are self-imposed? What if we're capable of so much more than we even give ourselves credit for?
It's like we need to rediscover that childlike curiosity,
Yes.
that sense of wonder that allows us to see the world with fresh eyes.
Without all those preconceived notions that limit our thinking. That's exactly what the sources are getting at. They talk about cultivating a beginner's mind,
A beginner's mind, okay.
approaching each situation with openness, curiosity, as if we're seeing it for the first time.
Oh, I love that. Letting go of that expert mindset that can get stuck in its ways.
And when we do that, when we approach those challenges with a beginner's mind, that's when we open ourselves up to those new possibilities, creative solutions that we might have missed otherwise.
It's like rewiring our brains to see obstacles as opportunities for innovation, for exploring uncharted territory.
Exactly. And this leads to another key principle, experimentation.
So it's not about having all the answers up front, it's about being willing to try different things, to learn as we go.
And embrace the stumbles along the way.
The stumbles, the mistakes.
The sources emphasize that failure isn't the opposite of success, it's part of the process.
Part of the journey.
And by embracing that process of trial and error, we can accelerate our learning, uncover new solutions that we might never have found otherwise.
This is so inspiring. It's like all these seemingly disparate ideas, from Stoic philosophy to Steve Jobs' reality distortion field, they're all weaving together into this powerful framework, right? For turning obstacles upside down.
They do, and they all point to this underlying truth.
Yeah.
We have so much more agency than we often realize.
Agency.
Even when the external circumstances feel completely overwhelming, we still have control over our thoughts, our beliefs, our actions.
And it's in those choices that we truly unlock our potential.
You got it.
Yeah.
This isn't about some magical ability to make obstacles disappear. It's about cultivating that mindset, a set of skills that allows us to face them with resilience, with resourcefulness, and even a sense of optimism.
I love that.
This has been such an eye-opening conversation.
It really has. I'm feeling so much more equipped to tackle those challenges that inevitably come up in life.
Our deep dive isn't over yet, though.
Oh.
In the final part, we'll explore how to really put these principles into action, how to translate these insights into, tangible strategies for overcoming those specific obstacles in your life.
This is where the rubber meets the road,
Exactly.
where we take all this amazing wisdom and put it to work. Okay, so we're back for the final part of our deep dive into turning obstacles upside down. We've covered a lot of ground, haven't we? Perception, emotions, even how to actually think differently about those challenges. But now I'm ready for the nuts and bolts. How do we actually apply all this wisdom when we're up against a real obstacle in our lives?
Well, the sources offer this clear framework for approaching any challenge, and it really boils down to three key elements: perception, action, and will.
Okay, perception, action, will. Got it. We spent a good amount of time unpacking perception, so I'm really curious to dig into action. What specific advice do the sources give when it comes to actually doing something, taking action when you're facing an obstacle?
Well, they emphasize that action is where the rubber meets the road.
Right.
right? It's not enough to just think differently. You gotta actually do something to move forward. And one of the most effective strategies they highlight is breaking that obstacle down into smaller steps, more manageable pieces.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's easy to get overwhelmed when you're looking at a huge challenge, but if you break it down, it feels less intimidating, right? Less daunting.
Exactly. It's like creating a roadmap, right? A series of milestones. Instead of focusing on the whole mountain, you just concentrate on that next step, then the next, and so on.
So shift your focus from the big picture to the smaller actions that you can actually control.
Precisely. And this ties back to another key principle, experimentation. Being willing to try different approaches,
Yeah.
knowing that you might not get it perfect on the first try.
So it's okay to stumble, to make mistakes as long as you're learning, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Hmm.
The sources really encourage us to see failure not as like a setback, but as valuable feedback.
A chance to learn.
A chance to adjust, refine, come up with something even better.
This reminds me of, all those stories about successful entrepreneurs. They often talk about how their early failures were essential to their success, right?
Yeah, for sure.
They learned more from their mistakes than from their wins.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
And it highlights the importance of embracing that process of trial and error. It's not about being perfect. It's about being persistent.
Persistence. That's a word that's come up a lot in this deep dive, hasn't it? The sources really seem to be saying that staying committed, even when it's tough, that's crucial to turning those obstacles upside down.
They do, and they offer some really inspiring examples. Like the story of Tommy John, the baseball pitcher. Came back from a career-ending injury to play for another 14 years.
That's amazing. He didn't just overcome the obstacle, he redefined what was possible. But I think for a lot of people, that idea of persistence, it can feel, well, daunting. How do you keep going when you're facing setbacks, when the path forward isn't clear? How do you do that?
Well, the sources suggest that true persistence, it's not about brute force or just stubbornness.
It's about something more.
It's about having that clear vision of what you want to achieve and then staying committed to that even when it gets tough.
So it's about that unwavering belief in yourself, in your goals, and in your ability to overcome the challenges.
That's it. And this brings us to that third element in the framework, will.
Willpower, that inner strength, right? The thing that helps you keep going when you just want to give up. We hear a lot about willpower, but it can feel kind of mysterious. Is it something we're born with, or can we actually develop it?
The sources are pretty clear on this. Willpower is like a muscle. You can strengthen it through training and practice. It's not some, mystical quality. It's a skill, something you can cultivate.
Okay, so how do we build that willpower muscle? Do we have to run mental marathons or what?
Well, the sources offer a much more accessible approach. They suggest practicing self-discipline in small, everyday choices.
So, not waiting for that big challenge to test our willpower.
Right.
We start by making those small, conscious choices that build that mental resilience.
Exactly. Like choosing to get up early and exercise, even when you don't feel like it.
Yeah.
Or resisting that tempting but unhealthy snack.
Okay, I get it.
Each of those little acts strengthens that willpower muscle,
Build up your reserves
prepares you for the bigger challenges down the road.
so you have that strength when you really need it.
That's it. And the sources connect this idea of willpower to another key principle, focusing on your values, your purpose.
So it's not just about pushing through for the sake of pushing through.
Right.
It's about connecting your actions to something bigger, something that motivates you, that gives it all meaning.
Exactly. When your actions are aligned with your values, it becomes much easier to find that inner strength, the motivation to keep going.
It's like that saying, find your why and you'll find your how, right?
Wow.
When you know why you're doing something, the how becomes so much clearer.
That's a great way to put it. And this brings us full circle to that idea of turning obstacles upside down. It's not about denying that challenges are hard. It's about choosing to see them in a way that, well, empowers you to move forward.
Embracing those challenges.
Yeah, as opportunities for growth, for learning, for becoming stronger and more resilient.
It's in those moments of adversity when we're pushed to our limits that we often find our greatest strength.
That's when we achieve those remarkable things.
This has been an amazing deep dive.
It has.
We've explored so much wisdom, so many practical strategies for not just overcoming obstacles, but using them to our advantage.
Remember, it's not about avoiding those challenges. It's about embracing them, seeing them as opportunities for growth, for transformation.
So as you face your own obstacles, remember these principles. Choose to see the opportunity, take action, and cultivate that will to persevere.
And never forget, you are capable of far more than you might realize. Sometimes, those greatest opportunities are disguised as the toughest obstacles. It's all about how you choose to see them.
That is a powerful thought to leave our listeners with. We hope this deep dive has given you the tools and the inspiration to turn your own obstacles upside down.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep turning those obstacles into opportunities.